Well, the day is certainly off to a good start, and I'm super excited about our next session, I'd like to call it, where we're talking about wellness in what we could probably think of it as the most literal sense, which is health. And this time around, we're going to have an interesting conversation between Dr. Renuka David and Dr. Shriram Nene. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Renuka David. Usually when an MC comes out and says the person needs no introduction, which is for Dr. Renuka, what normally follows is a very long introduction, so I'm going to keep it crisp. Dr. Renuka David is a graduate of the Coimbatore Medical College. She's a TEDx speaker, entrepreneur, and medical expert in the field of wellness. She has been a frontier contract doctor with the Indian Army for 3 years now, working extensively in the areas of well-being and healthcare of women and young adults in urban, rural, and tribal India. Dr. Renuka David, as you all know, is the managing director of the Radiant Medical Services. She provides holistic solutions for the prevention of non-communicable diseases through her talks, forums, and events. She is also the only lady doctor to have addressed all the Indian Air Force officers' wives on mental health during the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'd like to give Dr. Renuka David a big round of applause and welcome her to the stage. Dr. Renuka, please have a seat. Welcome. I'd like to introduce our next distinguished guest, Dr. Shriram Nene. Born in London and raised in the United States, Dr. Shriram Nene's natural curiosity drove him to the Scholars Program in Medicine at Washington University, St. Louis, a competitive combined 8-year undergraduate medical program. He went on to seek training with a fellowship in cardiovascular and thoracic surgery at the University of Florida. It was his goal to scale medicine that drove him to India in 2011, along with his wife, Madhuri Dixit. I think some of you may have heard of her. An accomplished actor and dancer, he created R&M Moving Pictures, which is a platform-agnostic digital media and content creation company. Currently, Dr. Nene is developing a medical platform, Pathfinder Health Sciences, which is committed to improving lifestyles and lifespans through precision, personalized health approaches using a combination of media, apps, wearable technology, and smart services marketplace. I suppose that's a little bit of what our previous speaker had talked about, but right now we are very excited about this conversation. So please put your hands together for our next speaker, Dr. Shriram Nene. Can we have a big round of applause? Dr. Renuka, over to you.
Thank you, Paloma. Good morning to everybody. Lovely seeing you all here, and welcome to the Radiant Wellness Conclave. I'm so privileged and honored to be in conversation with you, Dr. Nene, because you're from my own fraternity and specialized as a cardiovascular surgeon. So I think we're not going to bore the audience with a lot of medical terminologies, are we?
No, not at all. And
not at all.
I wanted to say it's a true honor to be here among such esteemed colleagues. Loved the first two talks and the conversations we had, and I wanted to thank Colonel David and Dr. Renuka for the hospitality and amazing program they've set up, which I didn't even know about, but the kinds of things they're doing are revolutionary. So my kudos to you.
Thank you so much. So I have a couple of questions and some fun sessions in the end. So let's start with something that you are a specialist in. We hear of so many people succumbing to heart attacks, dying very suddenly in the prime of their lives. We've heard people going to the gym with no underlying non-communicable diseases, and I think that's scary. So what are the 5 things that can be done to prevent this?
Okay, so let's back up 1 second. Part of our mission is to move from sick care to well care, and that's the whole point of this session and also the conclave. The idea is simple, that 17.5 million people a year globally die of heart disease and cardiovascular disease, 80% of that being heart attacks and strokes. In India, it's 17.5 lakhs, and it's the number one killer over all other non-communicable diseases. So the idea is an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and I think the idea is to swing the pendulum from acute care to prevention, early recognition, early treatment. So I think part of that is raising awareness. I see the gap as lack of awareness and lack of access to world-class, international, evidence-based medical care. And, India's not one India, 28 states, 8 union territories, constituting 1.412 billion people, 30% metro, 70% rural. Now, back to your question, how do you combat heart disease before it happens? And I think one important part is to identify the risk factors. So if you know you have a first-degree relative with heart disease, and particularly if they're less than 50 years old, your likelihood of having it is 4 to 10-fold higher than the normal person. The second is looking at your lifestyle. Certain things will put you at risk. Sedentary natures, smoking certainly is something which puts you at a much higher risk. Metabolic syndromes, where we've shifted from an agricultural to an industrialized society, and we're eating the same as what we did when we were farming, can be critical problems with it. The next thing is activity. Activity is only about 20% of the equation in keeping you normal, but it helps you with endorphins and other things which cause you to be on the right track. The second thing, or the last thing I would say, is to be positive and social. One of our other speakers, Dr. Ramadas, said it, that loneliness can kill you. And it's been very well shown in Italy that there's some cities which have an abnormally high lifespan. And when they studied why, it wasn't because they had superhuman genes or a different diet. In most cases, they had very, very tight social networks. And so I think India, in some ways, is a very old culture, 4,000 years, but it's a very young country. 2/3 of our population is below 35, and our median age is 28. We have an opportunity here to change the plot and the dialogue. Our life expectancy is 10 years less than the West. And our job, should we decide to accept it, and there's no choice in this, is to bring the level of awareness and access up, both in the metros and more importantly in the rural areas where 70% of the population lives. So the last thing is we have a very deep social network, but it's becoming fragmented, interestingly. Families are moving from a nuclear structure to a non-nuclear. So my advice to most people is create your base of 3 a.m. buddies who you can go to no matter what happens, and you can talk to them. And this will play into some of your other questions with mental disease and all the other things. But those are the 5 things I think about, and there'll be more to talk about with those.
As you so rightly said, cardiovascular disease remain at the forefront of India's health problems. I think that's a leading cause of mortality right now. But I think of late, lung diseases have also been on the rise. I don't know how many of you are aware that morbidity is increasing due to underlying lung diseases. So can you give us some reasons why urban India is facing this?
It's a great question. I did a talk on this on my channel, and the idea is, I grew up in Los Angeles, and the joke was that living in Los Angeles is like smoking a pack of cigarettes a day because the level of pollution was so high. This goes back to the sustainability piece which Dr. Ramadas spoke about, that we need to move away from certain things. It's not what you think, though. And the idea is the particulate matter has to go down. Some of that in Mumbai, for instance, is from construction and from heavy metal industries as well as other things. We need to move that out, use filters, do other things. But in places like Delhi, where you have inversion layers in the winter, you have significant increases in lung-related problems. Now you go into the rural areas, and this is something which can be fixed. Chulas, which is the traditional way of cooking, done in a closed environment without proper ventilation, has clearly been shown to increase lung disease and can prematurely cause COPD, emphysema, and other problems. We are seeing an increase in asthmatic complications, in lung disease, particularly in the metro regions. I think Dr. Ramdas talked about Chennai then and Chennai now. Well, look, we're facing that worldwide, not just in India. And we have a chance because our cities are developing with good urban planning, creating pockets of green and doing other things can help. The second thing is, I think we're moving to sustainable energy. We're not there yet. And there's a debate about electric cars. We can talk about that offline. But the thing is, do you shift the burden to the rural areas where the coal-burning plants are? I think we need to have more sustainable, renewable sources of energy. And then the last thing is, in your own homes, what can you do? Filtration units do work, HEPA filters as well as other things. And in Delhi, you can bring down the particulate matter pretty significantly. And it has been shown to improve lungs. But the problem is, it's not democratized. All levels of civilization in our country has to have it. Doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor. And that's not happening. And there was some very good pieces on this that the person who's affluent versus the person who's poor doesn't always have that. So we need to make sure that everyone has that at their need.
I agree. I completely agree. So there's another thing about another cause of morbidity in India is cancer. Cancer is something which I think 2-3 decades back we thought only the elderly or people like over 65, 70 were prey to cancer. But today I think younger adults, younger population are getting diagnosed with cancer. So do you think it's also apart from environment, as Dr. Anbumani had so rightly mentioned, do you think there's a genetic connotation to that? And what do you think that in terms of lifestyle, one needs to adapt, keeping all these things in mind?
It's a great question. So back in the days when we went through our education, there's something called Knudsen's hypothesis, which basically said that you had to have 2 mutations to have a cell become cancerous. And when we talk about cancer, what we're talking about are cells which outlive their normal life cycle. They don't die, and so what happens is they proliferate and either locally or distantly end up growing where they shouldn't be. Now, the issue is that there are subsets of people with genes which have already one mutation, and then they just need the second environmental factor to bring it out. Then there's subsets of people who have genes which will give them a cancer, like BRCA and various others, Lynch syndrome, whatnot. I think there's 2 things that we know. One is we're living longer. And so this plays to one end of the spectrum, that as we live to our 70s, 80s, and 90s, what is it that people will succumb to besides heart disease? And there's peaks to each of these things. To the point that you're making about living, or rather having cancer in younger populations, I think detection has gotten better. We had a very good conversation with the head of Tata Memorial, and he was, in the US, we do routine breast screening at home. Everyone's taught breast exams for women, and it can early detect nodules. But the real question is, what can you do with that in a rural area where they don't necessarily have the ability to treat it? And his contention was that it creates a level of angst or anxiety which is not able to be addressed. I would say the opposite. I say that you have to empower patients to take care of themselves. So back to that, if you know you have a family history of cancer, right, you need to put your antenna up and decide which things will be of detriment to you. The second thing is there's certain mutagenic things which we've talked about, cigarettes, alcohol, even they're finding with cured meats, with nitrosamines, even with pesticides and other things which we've seen in foods and all that, and even with some things in the air, right, that you can be exposed. And so I would say as we go to a situation where we're an industrialized society and we're able to detect it and people are getting older, we're going to see cancer at a higher incidence. The key to that is early detection. Because most of these cancers, I'll give you an example, breast cancer, 1 in 9 women worldwide will have it. Very common cancer. But if it's caught in its early stages, it's very treatable and the survival is excellent. Compare that to something like lung cancer or pancreatic cancer, which have abysmal results, right? Lung cancer, even if you catch it at an early stage, is treatable, but the problem is people don't show symptoms until much later. And there is data on CT screening with low-dose CT in patients with high risk, meaning over 10 pack years of smoking and a family history or alternatively not. So I think what we need to put in our algorithm as physicians and as patients is what is your risk? How are you going to address that? And what are you going to do to take your life back and prevent it? And if it does happen, God forbid, we can address it together. And if it's caught early, we can do a lot to treat patients.
Yeah, so that, I think, not only an early detection, other than there are a lot of tumor markers in the blood. So I think for every cancer, even like you said, lung cancer, the symptoms comes much later. I think colon cancer, again, it gets diagnosed only in the 3rd stage. So I think once you got the history of it, it's necessary to do your tumor marker tests. And so I think you could leave a message with the audience that if they want more on this, they could kind of write to us.
I think it's a great point that there are tumors, CA125, BRC, there's a ton of them. I think I'm very old school about this, that you take a good history and physical, 80% of your diagnosis gets done in that, and then you do corroborative testing. It shouldn't be the tail wagging the dog where you do all this testing. And that's what's frequently happening because there's so few physicians, only 1 million allopathic physicians, and almost 1.412 billion patients. So to your point, I think if you're high risk and you have an esteemed doc taking care of you, or you have a system, like what we're building with dashboards and everything like that, we can recommend stuff early so that we can detect it. And it's all about prevention, early detection, and early treatment in order to have better survival rates and not be a natural history study, which you see in India very frequently, that they come in very late. And that for me is heartbreaking.
I completely agree. So anyone on further queries, I'm sure they can write to us and we could guide them on to early detection of cancer and the tumor markers. Well, that again brings me, there are a lot of women sitting over here, and I think this question will interest you. We used to have the cervical cancer vaccine, but how has the HPV vaccine actually made a difference to the life of women? Because I don't know whether we are really advocating the way we tell our children below 1 year to have the entire set of vaccinations. I don't know whether we are doing it for our women. I don't know how many in my audience would know that there's this vaccination to prevent cervical cancer.
So it's an interesting point. There's some degree of question because I don't know if it's a taboo topic or not, but in the metros, if you're sexually active, your risk of cervical cancer goes up by human papillomavirus. And the data is very clear that if you're vaccinated, that risk goes down. And in the West, it's become standard. Now, we can put our heads in the sand and say, no one's having sex, right? But the problem is that if it's happening and it's unprotected, there is a risk of HPV proliferating, and with it, cervical cancer. So the connection has been shown pretty conclusively. So yes, to your point, and this is in your kind of domain, it's something which is simple, right? That we can vaccinate people and potentially prevent one form of cancer. Imagine that, right? So I think for our women, it's critical, and particularly the interesting part is it's in teenage women. Now, you can say what you want about morality and all the other things, and India is a duality of that. But I think we need to face reality now and say, look, let's do the best for our population and protect ourselves and move forward, because we know that it works. One topic I don't know if was in the questions is diabetes. And I don't know if we're hitting that or not, but it's 22% of the population. It's potentially preventable in some ways, that you will have the genes, the concordance is very high, and it's related to all the other diseases, heart disease, neurologic disease. The complications are vast, and the mortality is high. And we are a hotbed of diabetes. And this is one area where prevention, early recognition, early treatment will be a godsend, because we have shown that we can not only prevent it, but basically reverse it. And when I say reverse, I'm not saying that you won't have the genes. You will. It's just how those genes play out. And a lot of it is diet and exercise. More than that, it's also monitoring and having the patient be empowered to take care of themselves. And it's this jump we're going from agricultural to industrial states, where we're eating the same diets, going to our IT call centers or to our technology hubs, and working hard, and then going home and eating dosa and rice and all the things, high carb diets and whatnot. And so I think in particular, that's one area where we have been able to impact pretty significantly and can show substantively that it can be reversed. And one area which I think should be addressed day in, day out for everyone.
Absolutely. And when we were studying, diabetes used to be called the dirty disease. I don't know if you remember. It affects every cell of your body. So I think people with parents or grandparents with diabetes, I think they need to be mindful that they can prevent it, especially if they've inherited the bad gene. Okay, switching gears, let's talk on mental health. It's been a hot button topic of our times. Although it has been brushed under the carpet pre-COVID, I think after COVID and after Deepika Padukone came openly about her fight against mental illness, we have started having honest conversations. So how do you think, especially youngsters, today they pass through a lot of depression, anxiety, and suicidal tendencies? And I think it's majority youngsters, but then this is across the ages.
So, great question and very well framed. Let me go back a step. Where I trained, they created something called the DSM, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And it was a landmark achievement in psychiatry, because what was happening before then is they couldn't really correlate symptoms with the outcomes. And this was at a time where cycloperazines like Haldol had come out in the 50s and 60s, and all these patients with schizophrenia were able to be treated. Imagine you had someone with schizophrenia, they had no life. If you've seen A Beautiful Mind, you've seen other things, they had no life, they had no way to treat it. They were talking about, psychologists and Jung theory and Freud theory and things which weren't there. My belief, based on all that, is mental disease is just another medical disease. It should not have a stigma attached to it. We should address it. In the next 25 years, mark my words, we will know the neurotransmitters and the pathways in the brain and the genes which activate this. And when we do, we'll be sharper, along with the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, in diagnosing mental disease and treating it. For now, though, we have to take a step back and say that mental disease, as Dr. Ramdas so astutely pointed out, he said 10%. I would say the data we saw was in a lifetime, 70% of people will have some form of mental breakdown. Now, it can be something simple, or it can be like complex postpartum depression. It can be, anxiety. It can be stress. That can precipitate to other underlying problems. But in my field, as well as in the armed forces, PTSD is a thing. We saw doctors committing suicide in the pandemic because they were heartbroken over losing patients. I know how that is. And so the idea is to address it early and often, and think about the fact. Now, look, my parents' generation would have said, get over it. What's wrong with you? That's not the right approach. What we need to do is embrace it and say that, look, this person is having a hard time. Let's break it down. Let's do a combination of psychiatry and psychology, and for now, impart a solution. That may be a combination of medications, a combination of someone just listening to you and counseling, but never, ever for a second should it be a stigma. Just because someone has depression or has stress or has other things, it doesn't mean that they are unwell and not able to perform. It just means at that time point, they're struggling. And so I would say to all of you guys that we need to champion this and make sure that it's in our toolbox, because in doing that, imagine the people around you who could be more productive and have happiness and better lives. And at the end of the day, everything I do, you do, is all about happiness. How do we impart happiness to people through mind, body, and soul? And the idea is, this is one of those hot topics. Deepika was very outspoken about this, but honestly, I think which one of you in this audience hasn't had some point where they've had some obstacle get in their way and been sad about it? Alternatively, when have they not been mad about it? You know, this is one thing I tell my people on the platform, that if you look at the best CEOs, the best athletes, the best performing, high-performing guys, they always have a mental success coach. And that's what takes them from 99 to 100. So don't look at it as a stigma. In fact, look at it as your ability to unlock talent. And I think everyone in this audience has a kernel of genius and a superhero power. You just have to be ready to accept it and kind of embrace it. And you will have these setbacks, and it should not be a stigma. It should be something. When I hear about these cases in IIT and the colleges, it's heartbreaking. And for me, that's something that we should never see in a civilized society. So we need to create the means to address it, and it's one which can be done by telemedicine, by regular medicine, through private approaches, so that no one has to know until society is ready for addressing this head on, and until we have better means to kind of address it with neurological, biological, and medications, as well as other approaches.
Yeah, the goal should be to get India out of that 270, with, I think Raju mentioned the statistic of happiness, to the first 10 countries in happiness.
We should be Bhutan. It's right next door.
Bhutan,
Come on.
yeah.
Why can't we be Bhutan?
Yes. So that's what, the moment we address mental health as without a stigma, I think then India could get there.
I think it's a medical disease. It's no different than anything else. And when you look at it as a medical disease, then you remove the stigma. This is something you treat, and it gets better. And if it doesn't get better, you deal with it. But the bottom line is, until we look at it as a medical disease like heart disease, lung disease, diabetes, or hypertension, we're going to get in our own ways thinking it's a social thing. It's not a social thing. I mean, it ends up being a social thing, but we need to be practitioners and medical doctors and think about it differently.
Absolutely. So I think, Ram, your forte is artificial intelligence. You talk a lot about artificial intelligence, and I think, how do you think technology has revolutionized our industry, that's the health industry?
It's a great question. So we're looking at platforms which basically raise awareness and improve access. The problem is, and Raju hit it very nicely, I have to congratulate you, that we can't get out to the last mile. There aren't enough docs, there aren't enough medical schools to train them, and there's not enough institutions out in the periphery. So what I see is we need to embrace technology. Now, I had a very good conversation in the US just 2 weeks ago, and you either deny and block, or you embrace and utilize artificial intelligence. So there's a couple of points, right? One is, it won't replace humans. Think of it as when we went from doing long math to slide rule to calculator. Everyone was saying, well, look, the kid has a calculator. He doesn't know how to do math, right? But what happened is, it allowed us to reach our potential faster. Now go a step forward to Moore's law and computers, where every 18 months, and by the way, that 18 months is no longer there with some of the AI tools, we can develop 3 nanometer chips and develop technology much faster. Now take a step forward to AI. And AI is nothing more than neural networks. ChatGPT is one of the famous ones, right? ChatGPT 3 has 100 billion connections. ChatGPT 4 now has 1 trillion neural connections. You saw in Raju's talk how many petabytes the brain holds, and also saw how much of a neural connection you have. But it's for repetitive tasks, and for some tasks, until we train the neural networks adequately, they won't be able to kind of do all of the things we want. And even with ChatGPT 4, I played with it in one of the episodes on my channel and looked at, asked what happens. Look, in 10 years, potentially 40% of jobs may be replaced by AI. That's not a bad thing. Why I say that is because it just becomes a tool and your job definition changes. So your ability to be creative and think differently and use it. I'll give you an example. Microsoft is they spent $1 billion on OpenAI. And Sam Altman and their team basically gave back to them. So now in the next version of Office, let me digress for 1 second. I was a software developer before I went to med school. And my Maharashtrian parents said to me, you either become a doctor or engineer or we won't pay. That was their algorithm or metric for success. So one comment I'm going to make is, we don't need any more doctors and engineers. What we need is creative people. And if your kid wants to become an actor or a musician or a writer or a journalist, let them. Because the world has so many pathways. Google doesn't just hire engineers. They hire all sorts of people. And the idea is, I spent 20 years practicing heart surgery, did 10,000 cases, and then in 2011 pivoted to creating technology. And my vision was I couldn't scale heart surgery, and because I could only do 3 to 5 open hearts, minimally invasive, robotic, endovascular cases a day, amounting to maybe 500 patients per year and 2,000 consults. There's 8 billion people on the planet. We have to have a means to scale medicine so that we can address them. And the only way I see forward is by taking a combination of media, tech, and smart services and putting them together. The media we use to increase awareness and improve outcomes. And this came from my kids, by the way, where I would see them watching House MD and The Good Doctor and ER, and they'd come to me with questions and they'd be learning. What I discovered, and seems obvious now, but I discovered that if you can entertain and educate, right? Something doctors don't always do well, because they'll say, you must do this or you will die. You will be that face on the side of the wall, right? With the garland on it.
If you don't do this, I'll give you an injection.
Yes, that's the other pathway. But the thing is that if you can entertain and educate, then all of a sudden it changes it. So our media vertical was launched that way. The technology is a cloud-based AI EMR with smart devices like the rings and the other things which we're incorporating. And what it does is it gives you an active dashboard. So to Raju's comment, it gives you a way to figure out how you're doing. I was talking to everyone yesterday. I'm like, do you drive cars? In your car, you have a speedometer, you have a fuel gauge, you have an oil gauge, you have a temperature gauge. Why shouldn't you have that for your body in real time? And that's where we need to go. If I can give it to the people in the rural areas, how can that change us? That way we know early in the decision pathway, and we don't all of it. So my comment with AI is, it won't replace us. I think as it gets smarter, we will have to put governors on it. This goes back, I'm a huge sci-fi fan, and I met a few of them, Asimov and Bradbury. And if you've read any of Asimov's books, I, Robot, he has the laws of robotics, and he has the first 3 laws, and the one is you can do no harm to humans. So we need to engineer it so that's always in there. And I don't see a Terminator sort of scenario so long as we're cognizant of what's there. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Terminator. I think many of you are. But yeah. And so the issue is that don't be afraid of AI. Embrace it. So back to Microsoft, they're putting it into all their tools. So you can talk to it and have it create a PPT for you, write something. My kids' teachers were afraid because all the kids were using ChatGPT to do their homework. And I'm sort of like, well, now they're putting watermarks, right? But why is it wrong? Because it's the same as you using a computer or a calculator, right? It's just a tool. It's the questions you ask. Recently, someone won a art competition, and they had used DALL-E 2 to create art. And they didn't tell them that they'd used it until after they won it. And, my wife and I were talking about it. We said, maybe there needs to be a separate category because that art that DALL-E created was beautiful. And it was the questions the artist asked that changed everything. So anyway, I'm sorry to be long-winded about it, but it's such an important part of our lives. And believe me when I say in the next 5 to 10 years, your lives will all change for the better, not the worse. And you'll be part of that revolution in India. We will lead the world if we have our way. And smartest people are in the room. I'm telling you, we go places, we don't only succeed, but we dominate. Head of Microsoft, head of Google, everywhere you look, right? Why can't we do it here for all our people?
Great question. Great answer. And now, Ram, we've had too much of serious stuff. People are really engrossed in all the seriousness that we've been talking on. So let's have some fun.
For sure.
So I'm going to have rapid fire, but with a difference. So we're going to play bingo. And for all of you who know bingo or who do not bingo, bingo is something like playing tambola with a difference. So could I have the grid on the AV, please?
I thought she was going to ask me to sing like last night. She's an excellent singer, by the way.
I thought I was interviewing you, Ram. Can we have the grid, please? And we could have the glass bowls if it's ready. Yes. So, what's your name? Neha. So, Neha, take it around, and I need to have the grid first.
So I would say the best talks are when you guys are asking the questions. And the ones I've been at are when you go away with more questions than what we answered.
Okay. Neeti, you'll have to come in the front. I'll request Neeti to come in the front, please. Okay. Neha, go around and just get someone to take up. So question 4. If you were to recommend one book on health and wellness, what would it be?
Sorry, a book?
Now this is under 1 minute. Under 45 seconds.
I'm sorry, can you repeat it? A book?
If you were to recommend one book on health and wellness, what would it be?
I have one coming out, but it's not ready yet. That's a plug, sorry. There's so many I've read. And,
under 1 minute.
Oh man, it's a tough one. David Sinclair does some good stuff. I'm blanking on a name. Can you suggest one?
Daniel, emotional intelligence?
Yeah, I think that's a good one. Emotional intelligence.
Okay. Next question. There, Poni's picking up.
Number 3.
Number 3. See, that's how you blink. You're going to get your bingo.
So you have to get all the numbers in a line. That's how bingo works, right?
Okay. Poni, you got number 3? Okay. You don't have a mic, so I'm going to read this for you. One wellness habit you can't live without?
Sleep. Make sure you have enough sleep. It's like the superpower that no one knows about, and they end up binge watching or doing some crazy stuff. But make sure you have enough sleep because it will power you for things which you aren't ready for.
Wonderful. Next number. Where's Neha? Okay.
Question number 2. What's your go-to healthy snack when you need an energy boost?
Great question. I would say, for me, I'm often on a high protein, low carb because I'm training, and so nuts for me work really well. And they have just enough carbs, but a lot of protein.
Neha, I think you need to give that a shake. If it's 1, he's 1. He's got his bingo.
Come on, guys, help me out.
This is question number 8. What's your ultimate guilty pleasure food?
Oh, you know, I call it my kryptonite, and my wife will tell you that do not bring kaju katli in the house.
Kaju Katli. The next question.
This is question number 13. In your view, what's the most pressing public health issue of our time?
In your view, what is the most pressing public health issue?
I think lack of awareness of what's good for each person and the education you need to do that. I think if we could impart education to everyone, which is specific, personalized, you could make a huge difference in people's trajectory and long-term happiness, lifespans, and lifestyle.
Well said. Next number.
Dr. Nene's question number 1. What's your favorite?
You want to pick again, just so we don't end it?
You'll have to answer that question though.
I'll answer the one, don't worry.
Okay. What's your favorite way to stay active and fit?
So I love playing tennis, but I'm a total sports guy, and I love gyms and swimming, racing cars, you name it, I do it. Climb mountains, parachute. I think if you've seen my Instagram feed, you'll see crazy stuff going on. And you know, my wife grew up here. I grew up in the U.S. In the U.S., you embrace this stuff. Here, it's only catching on. So I would say we need to go farther, create bike trails, create running trails, get people active, and not just focused on rote education and scores and this and that, which I think is a lot of India right now.
So you won the bingo.
Yay.
Huge round of applause for him. And I think we had a very interesting session on health. Thank you, Ram. And I'm sure most of you would know, but for those who do not know, he's a very well-known, distinguished cardiovascular surgeon. But for us Indians, born and brought up in India, his wife is the only one and only Madhuri Dixit.
Say again?
She is.
Thank you so much. That's my man there. He's got my back. And I didn't pay him. Thank you.
Thank you, Ram.
You're
That
most
was a
welcome, and
wonderful
thank you
session.
for the honor of being here. You guys are doing great, and I'm very proud to be a part of this.
A big round of applause for Dr. Shriram Nene, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to call upon Major General M. Indrabalan to please join us on stage, do the honors, and present our guest with a memento, if you would please, sir.